Welcome everyone to our weekly call. Hope you all had a great weekend. And I should acknowledge, as you can see, that our call is sponsored by DNS-OARC. So thank you to them for their support of our activities. That's much appreciated. Okay, let me share my slides, and I'll try the format that I've used last week. But as before, shout out if this doesn't work well, if you can't see the whole slide, see whether I got the right format or not. But I'm hoping this is okay, unless someone either shouts out or puts something in the comments to the contrary. So it's working for Eric, so we'll take Eric as a straw poll. Then in that case, thank you, Eric, for that. Okay, right, agenda for the call today. As hopefully most of you are expecting, we're primarily going to talk about the forthcoming OARC 43 and RIPE 89 meetings, starting imminently in the case of OARC this coming Saturday. And then time permitting, we'll pick up on some of the sort of recent news headlines, etc. And as previously, the plan is I'll sort of talk through things that have caught my attention from the agendas from those two meetings. If anyone wants to highlight anything else, that's absolutely fine. Feel free to jump in as we run through the meeting, and either just unmute and shout out if there's something else, or indeed pop something in the chat if that's easier, depending on whereabouts you are. Okay, so let's jump right in. So firstly, as a reminder, OARC takes place this coming Saturday and Sunday, immediately followed on by RIPE from Monday through Friday of next week. They're co-located in the Clarion Congress Hotel in Prague. So if you're attending both, you don't have to relocate. Makes it nice and easy for everyone. And when I looked this morning, so this is roughly right, there's just over 140 people in total registered for OARC, of which just over 100, I think about 115. So those numbers might not be quite right, but certainly over 100 were in person, with the balance attending remotely. For RIPE, it was around 750 in total, of which just under 150 were registered as remote attendees, so around 600 in person. As I say, that was from a quick look earlier on today, so that will change. I think RIPE uses MeetMe, if I recall, for remote access, same as ITF, which is a really good remote access tool, as many of you will be familiar with. I'm not sure, I think OARC maybe uses Zoom, but I wouldn't swear to that, the sort of Zoom webinar format. I'm a big fan of MeetMe as a tool, so it's good to see that RIPE uses the same tool as the ITF, and it's also helpful refamiliarization before the ITF meeting the following week. Right, so I'm going to start with the OARC meeting and then roll through and talk about RIPE. Unsurprisingly, as it's DNS-OARC, there's an awful lot of things on the agenda which I thought were really interesting. What I'm not going to do is to go through them all, because it would take far too long, and it's a bit pointless going through literally everything on the agenda. And I should say the things that I haven't called out doesn't mean to say that they're not interesting. So if any of the people that are presenting those topics on the call, apologies in advance. Simply these were the things that particularly caught my eye. Across the two meetings. I'm sure there's plenty of other interesting stuff as well, which hopefully some of you on the call will reference. But I was really pleased to see session 2, you'll see on the screen on Saturday, sort of midway through the morning, is a protocol vulnerabilities panel. which then runs into sort of mainly sort of different security or vulnerability related things. You'll see there sort of DDoS, key trap, self-amplification, etc. So I thought that was a really good development personally, because there's a lot of exploits that take advantage in various ways of the DNS. So I think it's really entirely appropriate for the OARC meeting to spend a fair chunk of time on that topic. I'm obviously not going to go through all of them individually. You'll see from the, just to highlight the little paperclip, many of the presentations are already accessible on the OARC site, and when I share the slides post call, and I'll include a link to them for reference. So you can certainly see the slides where they've been uploaded, plus usually an abstract of the various talks as well, which is, I think, incredibly helpful. But all of that block really caught my eye as a good thing. I should have said also, apologies, that it's still time to register for either or both meetings, either in person or remotely, if you haven't already done so. The RIPE is free to attend remotely. I think there's a charge for OARC for remote attendance, but I wouldn't swear to it. And if someone happens to know that and can pop it in the chat, that would be fantastic. But if not, I will find that out afterwards. I realise that's a gap in my knowledge. There are charges for both to attend in person, plus obviously you've got the hotel costs. Anyway, sorry, back to the OARC session, but all of those look really interesting to me for the Saturday morning. Oh, thank you. Eric suggested that there's nominal fee for attendance remotely on OARC, so free for RIPE, potentially a small fee for OARC for remote attendance. So looking for a Saturday afternoon, again, a few things that caught my eye. There's a short slot, only 15 minutes. So a lot of the sessions, I should have said, for OARC tend to be quite punchy, 15, 20 minutes often, which means they can cover a lot of ground in a short space of time. So Robert Saffer from the Whalebone team is giving, just talking a little bit about DNS-OARC in terms of public anonymization. I'm interested to track the DNS-OARC project anyway, so I'm always interested in that, and I'm hoping we'll have a date confirmed soon for Robert to come back on the call before the end of the year to give a more general update on that project. And then a look at authoritative name server performance of TLD. Excuse me, which is I'm reading from the abstract from that. I think it was a comment that there's been some work looking at the performance of the root servers, but that probably the TLDs will have more impact on the end user experience. So they're looking at the TLD name server performance now. So I'm interested to see that, and good that people are thinking about it from the perspective of impact on the end user experience in particular. And then just sort of later on Saturday afternoon, you'll see a slot again looking at security exploits. This one looking at dangling DNS for malicious emails. So continuing that cybersecurity theme, and also again, I think this is really important. Generative AI in the DNS as well is the final slot on Saturday. Which isn't to say, just to emphasize, any of the other things are not interesting, just these were especially interesting, I thought. Was somebody trying to come in there, in which case please do so. Or it may have been just somebody's microphone was glitching, in which case not a problem. I'll assume the latter. And then of course we got the OARC social on Saturday evening. When I looked on the website earlier today, I didn't have the details yet what that is, but it's generally fun. Certainly the OARC meetings I've been at has always been well worth doing, so I'm sure that will be the case in Prague, where there are plenty of good places to socialise from recent experience at the IETF meeting. I think Eric's just posted some more details on the remote fee. $125 for members, $200 otherwise. So maybe that's the current cost. So a bit cheaper than attending in person, certainly. Okay, then looking at Sunday. And again, there's a whole bunch of sort of interesting sessions. I'll pull out less of these, but the again, mid-morning, looking at the DOS and hijacks panel in darker green, and then directly underneath that, again, further on, some vulnerabilities, looking at DDoS amplification of open resolvers, considering transparent DNS forwarders in the case of oblivious DNS, which is good to see. I'm very interested in that one, and then covert domain hijacking, something which was in the news this week rather topically. So again, continuing looking at some of the vulnerabilities in different ways, which is, in my view, really valuable. So that's very much a theme coming through. So I think in my unbiased opinion, I think the program committee have done a fantastic job in putting together some top-notch content. And then finally, a couple of pieces, again, which caught my eye. One on field experiments in post-quantum. This is looking on Sunday afternoon, which is good to see. There's been sort of various papers published on that, and it's also been touched on in the right meeting as well. So good it's covered on the agenda for OARC. And then you'll see some client authentication recommendations for encrypted DNS as well, which Jeffrey's covering. And then we round off with lightning talks, and I don't think they've been finalised yet. So that will be a sort of a mystery tour. I think we'll probably only have those finalised possibly as late as Saturday. And we wrap up, as you can see, just before 4 p.m. on Sunday. And then for those of us that are members of OARC, we've got the AGM that follows immediately afterwards, again, in the same venue. So even though it's only a day and a half, there's a lot of, in my view, really good quality content. Obviously all linked in various ways to the DNS, so hard not to find things of interest in my view. I don't know if anyone wanted to jump in with any thoughts or comments. I'm not sure if anyone's on the program committee that's on the call, but anyway, if anyone wants to jump in and say anything, feel free to either unmute and speak or pop something in the chat if you wish. And I'll just stop talking for a moment. It doesn't look like there's anything burning, but thanks for your comment, Jim. Okay, let's segue then neatly into the RIPE meeting. Which is obviously runs across the whole of the week, Monday through Friday lunchtime at least. As I say, same hotel, same venue. And what I'm going to do, I've highlighted a few different things, but they don't really show so easily. So I just put them on, listed them all on a slide for simplicity. So there's a range of plenary sessions, and then I'll just go back to the agenda and call out a couple of other things. So Jeff Houston is, as you can see, talking about infrastructure security, and Jeff is, in my view, always good value. So he's one of the speakers in the Monday afternoon plenary sessions. And then there's a further set of plenaries that follow after a break, also on Monday. few of them focused on the IETF, which is rather convenient for those of us that will be in Dublin the following week. But in particular, as you can see, they're looking at there's a new working group looking at sustainability effectively in terms of power management and so on, and a second one looking at network operations, both of which I think are good topics to see the ITF picking up on, and also Auguste Bornick looking at the European Cyber Resilience Act and its relevance to open source projects, which I know is a topic that the open source community have been grappling with. So I'll be interested to see what line he takes on that. On Tuesday, two separate sessions, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, both on post-quantum, as you can see, post-quantum transition and its effect on protocols in the morning, and then in the afternoon, there's looking at the sort of field experiments of post-quantum on DNS-SEC. A topic that Peter Thomason and others have published a number of papers on, so I think they're presenting to sort of amplify some of the findings from their papers. And then also on Thursday, there's a DNS resolver recommendations session. So you may recall, so going back to the agenda, the DNS working group, which itself is meeting on Wednesday in the morning. They set up a study group looking at resolver recommendations, building on the work that we did on this call a couple of years ago now on policy recommendations for European resolvers, to try and do better than Mozilla's trusted resolver. There are trusted recursive resolver recommendations, but some which acknowledge that GDPR existed, for example, and also ICANN's kindness initiative. So in my view, what the DNS working group done is to sort of build on those, and the BOF that meets on Thursday late afternoon, early evening is sort of just spending some time talking about those resolver recommendations, which were published a few months ago now, if I recall. So it's really the outcome of that work. So as you can see on the slide, the various plenaries that I've sort of pulled out things from, the DNS working group and the BOF session are the main ones that caught my eye. There's a lot of other stuff on the agenda, as you can see. And again, there's various social things. So there's a newcomers lunch, midday on the Monday, a welcome reception Monday evening. There's another social thing, I can't remember what it was, on the Tuesday. I think that's just networking on the Tuesday, and there's the regular ripe dinner on the Thursday evening. So there's quite a few different things happening through the week. But again, I'll just pause and see if anyone wants to call out anything else that caught your eye from the agenda, or that you think I've overlooked, which is perfectly fine. So if there is, your chance to shout out now. Again, pop something in the chat if that's easiest, or by all means just unmute and talk if that's better for you. Yeah, I think I see Suzanne's comment in the chat. The working group agenda is due this Wednesday. Yeah, I think that's for the ITF. So we'll touch on the ITF next Monday on this call, for that reason that the working group agendas are due by Wednesday of this week. My experience, they won't all necessarily meet that deadline, but hopefully the vast majority should be available by then, with a few stragglers no doubt to follow. So yeah, that's why we'll pick that up next week, rather than try and second guess what they might be this week. Anything else anyone wants to comment on with regards RIPE, the RIPE agenda, or indeed OARC, if something suddenly struck you? Last call for either of those. If not, I know a few of the people on this call will be present this week at the meetings, which is great. From your comment in the chat earlier, David, I'm not sure if you're registered. Is that for OARC? I'm guessing, perhaps, maybe even RIPE as well, or was that for?
Yes, no, I can just for OARC.
Oh, fantastic! So. And I know a few others I can see on the call will definitely be there as well. So it should be a good meeting, I think, this time. Okay, well, if anyone thinks of anything else, just pop something in the chat. But other than that, I will then move on just to talk through some of the news headlines. But let me just firstly change how I'm sharing my screen. I saw a comment in the chat that I was maybe inadvertently obscuring some of the slide content. So let me just try it this way around instead. I've gone backwards. My apologies. Right, so let's look at some of the news headlines. And as I say, I'll share the slides afterwards, just if you want to refer back to stuff. So a reminder, I'm calling out some things from the news headlines email, which many of you get. If you don't get it and want to, just drop me a line and I'll add you to the mailing list. But things that caught my eye from the last week or so. Well, firstly, as I hope you'll all be aware, as we talked about it as recently as last Monday, the European Union's NIS2 rules are now, in theory at least, in force, albeit there's a fair number of the member states are lagging in their implementation in their local legislation. But the European Commission put out a press release to that effect on the 18th, which is the day in question. And there was sort of coverage from various others, as you would expect. I've just put links to the comments from the DNS Research Federation and also from Infoblox, as well as a reminder. You can find the two calls that we did on the topic with Michael, one back in May and the one last week as well. Which focus in particular on articles 21 and 28, if I recall. So it shouldn't be a surprise, but there was a fair amount of other coverage about that as well. Completely unrelated to that, ICANN, the Office of the CTO, have just published two documents that look at blockchain naming systems, which I was quite surprised to see. Really just focused on the technological aspects, as you would expect, as it's come out of the office of the CTO. I don't think they're intending to endorse or indeed denigrate an alternative naming system. It's quite interesting to see them put out two documents with some initial analysis. So definitely worth a look for those of you that have at least a passing interest in alternative naming systems. And then finally on this slide, there was an interesting post on the APNIC blog looking at three different methods to inspect encrypted TLS traffic, looking at the pros and cons of each of those three methods, which given that TLS 1.3 poses certain network management challenges, it was interesting to see someone giving a bit of attention to that particular subject matter. So good to see. A whole bunch of other things. I certainly won't go through all of these. It will take far too long, and you'll be bored silly. I'll maybe just mention the second one down there. I think a lot of people just sort of throw away references to end-to-end encryption as that solves all of our security needs. So it was quite interesting to see a piece in Bleeping Computer just highlighting that researchers have found security vulnerabilities in a number of cloud storage platforms allegedly using end-to-end encryption, and they found various vulnerabilities despite their use of encryption in that way. So, like all things, all different technologies, if you implement something badly, then there will be flaws, as they're now showing. So end-to-end encryption is not magic if you do it badly. And then finally, I think we discussed last week that Apricot, they'd announced a new location. It was originally going to be in Dakar and has now been relocated. And they've now put out a call for presentations. So that's out. Similarly, Eurodig has been confirmed taking place in May of next year in Strasbourg. And again, they've put out a call for issues. So the way that works, they try and look at what issues people are interested in covering, and then from that start to formulate a proposed agenda, and then fill it with content. So as always, you've got to the end of this calendar year to insert your thoughts on that. And as we've sort of just discussed, the final agenda for the ITF meeting is now available, at least the structure, but not all of the detail against all of the working group sessions. So that should be available from Wednesday. But as I mentioned earlier, we'll discuss that on this call same time next week. There's a whole bunch of other stuff happening. I definitely won't go through all of these, but just highlight the sort of Telegram probe continues with the French and Belgium law enforcement agencies apparently cooperating on their investigations. Various other things. I'm not sure it's worth covering any of those. Maybe just one though. Interesting piece from Domain Tools. I think Joe may have been the author of that, so you're on the call, Joe. Just highlighting that you may already be using post-quantum cryptography, even if you didn't know it. So good to see increasing commentary on post-quantum. And it's rather topical given the coverage, I think, in the middle of the week about allegedly sort of Chinese academics using quantum computing to crack a number of different types of encryption, although in reality I think the headline was somewhat overstated. But at least it's making people think about it, which is a good thing. And then, various other things caught my eye, which you can look at your leisure. And then in terms of upcoming deadlines, if you plan to update any internet drafts for the ITF, the deadline is, I think it's 23:59 UTC. It generally is, but it's today anyway. If you want them to go into the data tracker before the cutoff, and then it will freeze until the start of the meeting in Dublin in 2 weeks. Also today is the cutoff to take advantage of the early registration fees, which after today go up to the standard rate. So it bumps it up, I think, for in-person by $100 or so a person, and a bit less than that for remote, but it's definitely a bit cheaper to register today if you've not already done so. When I last looked, there are about 1,200 people registered in total, there or thereabouts, I think. but I hadn't looked in the last little while. But anyway, the numbers were ticking upwards, which was good to see. And then also this week, unsurprisingly, if you want to give a lightning talk at the OARC meeting, you've got until the 27th. So you've got a few days left yet, but I wouldn't leave it too long. If you want to put in a proposal for, I think they're usually 5 to 10 minutes or thereabouts, to get those on the agenda. And then deadlines continue, but those are the ones which are imminent, either today or in the case of the lightning talks, the end of this week as a deadline. Okay, so forthcoming events. Well, if you're planning to go to NENOG, you're hopefully already in Toronto, so you know that starts today and runs through till Wednesday. And then we've discussed ad nauseum OARC and RIPE starting Saturday and then running through next week. And then, of course, next Saturday, the ITF 121 hackathon starts, runs over the weekend, and the meeting proper starts, well, Sunday evening for the welcome reception, and then Monday through Friday of that week in Dublin. So you can, if you go to NENOG as well, or I think the ITU is meeting this week, there's a and then ICANN, I think, is meeting post the ITF the following week in Istanbul. So you could probably spend the next month in conferences if you were so inclined. So there's plenty of good things happening over the next little while, as you can see. And if you can't make it to Dublin, whatever reason, for the ITF meeting, you can always go to the UK IGF in London on the 5th of November instead. Yeah, loads of good things happening over the next few weeks. Okay, finally from me, and then I'll see what other business anyone wants to raise. Just a reminder. So next week, on this call, as I mentioned earlier, we'll be talking about the agenda for the ITF meeting. And of course, because of the change of the clocks, that will be at 1600 UTC, not 1500. So for many of us, that will be the same time in effect. But I know that I think US clocks, in fact, I think Eric, I put a comment in the chat to that effect, so they'll be slightly out of sync for a week or so. So do bear that in mind, that we move to 1600 UTC exercise for the reader to work out what that means in your local time zone. But if you are in Prague for the RIPE meeting next Monday, you can have the exciting opportunity to join me to do the call in person. If you so desire, and if not, anyway, so we can sort of meet socially post call and find something interesting to do somewhere in Prague, I'm sure. And then the following week, we'll be in Dublin for the ITF meeting, and again, by all means, we can do something social there. There won't be a call on the 4th, so let's find somewhere fun in Dublin in the evening instead. I can see Tommy, yeah, keen to abolish daylight savings. Yes, that would make things easier for everyone, wouldn't it? But except possibly farmers, but that probably doesn't apply to anyone on this call. So there you are. Anyway, that I think is it for me. In fact, yes, it is. So let me stop talking and see if anyone wants to come in with anything else. So any other business from anyone, remembering that the call is being recorded at this point. So any last thoughts on really important things that I've completely overlooked on the agendas for the OARC or RIPE meetings that you want to call out, or anything else that you want to raise at the moment? And as always, unmute and talk, or pop it in the chat if that's easier. I don't think I'm seeing anyone typing. No one's unmuted so far. In which case, let me stop recording and say thank you, everyone. Hope you found the call useful.